Well, hello everyone and welcome to the CLI ALPMA Innovation and Legal Tech Week 2021 live program. My name's Alison Laird and I'm delighted to be hosting this roundtable discussion, which is focusing on what do transformational leaders really do differently? And we'll be discussing this important topic with three fabulous leaders: Kate Fazio, who's the Head of Innovation Engagement from Justice Connect; Caryn Sandler, who's a partner and the Chief Knowledge and Innovation Officer at Gilbert and Tobin, and she's also the co-chair of the CLI Advisory Board; and Laura Vickers, who's the principal of Nest Legal. We were also hoping to have Demetrio Zema from Law Squared, who is going to be joining us, but unfortunately he's unwell today. We hope you feel better soon, Demetrio. So let's get started. Leaders of transformation initiatives usually work with teams to identify where change is needed. They often create a vision to guide the change through from inspiration and often a bit of perspiration to execution by collaborating with committed team members. Often, these transformational leaders are able to inspire people to achieve unexpected or remarkable results, and we have three such leaders with us today. So to start off the session, I thought I'd hand over to each of our expert panelists to talk us through an initiative or a project that did indeed achieve unexpected or remarkable results and how they actually achieved it. So Caryn, G&T is known to excel in innovation and change. I was wondering if you can talk us through one of your initiatives where transformational leadership has played a critical role.
Thank you, Alison, and lovely to be here this afternoon. I'll just share my screen now. One moment. So hopefully everyone can see that, but what I wanted to talk to today was really around the introduction of our GT Docs unit. And just by way of introduction, I lead the Legal Service Innovation team and G&T Innovate at Gilbert and Tobin, and the team is made up of a variety of teams, being knowledge and practice innovation, legal project management, transformation, legal informatics, which is really the AI and data, and now GT Docs. And really the purpose and objective of this team is to support our internal drive for efficiency and effectiveness at Gilbert and Tobin, and also support our clients in legal transformation as well. So what was the situation that we were dealing with? For those of you who might be familiar with document review, it's basically a process of sifting through terabytes of data to pinpoint documents relevant to a particular case, and whether that be in litigation or regulatory matters. This goal was to basically find that smoking gun or identify any confidential or protected information to be removed before handing over the documents to a regulator. And for many of you who would be familiar with this process, the technology does assist with this. But document review still today requires large teams of paralegals or junior law students to manually review each document. And traditionally, our lawyers were actually responsible for mobilizing, training, and managing that work under intense pressures. So what we were looking to do was, how can we actually change this? We were looking at the various challenges. We had a significant increase in volume of work for G&T in both our litigation and regulatory matters, which is obviously a great thing for the firm, but certainly made that sort of surge capacity quite difficult. We were constantly having to recruit casual paralegals and lawyers at very short notice. And basically the ability to scale quickly and seamlessly was not always there. And also you got variable qualities if you need to bring in people within 24 hours. Efficiency was obviously absolutely critical as our clients demand value for money, and ensuring that consistent quality review, irrespective of the volumes of people coming in, was certainly front of mind for us in terms of our legal service delivery. And what we also wanted to do, because as a firm we're really committed to continuous improvement in the ways of our workings, we wanted to ensure that we embedded the continuous improvement in the actual review process. So what had to be achieved? We needed to develop and grow a dedicated centre of excellence specialising in managing and supporting the document review process. And with that in mind, we introduced GT Docs. So I'll go through what GT Docs was, but basically we launched it on the 20th of August 2019, and it allowed us to develop a unit, which was a dedicated unit for document review for litigation and regulation. But we have a completely new model in the way in which we actually have dedicated teams, so beyond the lawyers, dedicated teams in that unit who are junior lawyers or paralegals that belong to sort of G&T, but obviously within a particular unit, they work hand in glove with the actual lawyers. But we also had a surge capability onshore that we had actually gone through, vetted an entire team of paralegals and junior lawyers that we can call on. We knew exactly what their particular requirements were and also when they were available. So we knew their availability as well. But what was really quite unique, and you can see it over there on the slide, is our partnership with Elevate Services. And I think what G&T demonstrated to us was that creativity and outsourcing can certainly enable a firm, even the size of G&T, which traditionally has a national footprint, to not only establish its own offshore service centre, but do so in a manner that actually improves quality and consistency and efficiency and relieves our lawyers from doing some of that work. So we've got a dedicated team onshore, which is dedicated to GT Docs, but we've also got that search capability. But we have a dedicated team through Elevate situated in India, who is also part of the G&T team. So we don't flex those resources. They are dedicated Gilbert and Tobin resources that work within GT Docs. And we've also got the surge capability over there as well. So if we need to go, we currently have, let's say, 10 people over there in India and 10 people in Australia onshore. But if we need to pivot, and I'll give you an example shortly, to 100, we can certainly do that overnight. So what actions were needed to take to deliver on this quite significant change in the way in which our lawyers operated? Because everything was done by the lawyers, and now we've basically taken part of that, and they work hand in glove with one another, but we've certainly taken that and placed that in a unit in its own right. So we had to have extensive consultation with partners. We needed them to actually believe in the vision, in what we were trying to achieve, and also work through what the actual operating model would look like. We had extensive consultation with the lawyers as well, because we wanted to understand what their pain points and how we could actually solve for those particular pain points. We actually developed, and this is partly, being developed by our people team, is pods, so people on demand service. So we basically have a dedicated sort of app or technology in which people can express interest, and we do interviews of individuals. And we also have that dedicated book, so we can basically move into search capability when we need that. We needed to recruit an entire team. So we needed to recruit the lead of the team, and we also needed to recruit all the actual dedicated resources as part of that, and then also work with the Elevate team as well. We obviously needed to get board approval for this, and we took this to the board multiple times. And the operational design was incredibly important in how that worked with the technology, because what we wanted to do was solve for the various pain points that we had identified as part of the broader process. But we wanted to make sure that we embedded sort of that continuous improvement, that ways of working that were aligned to the Gilbert and Tobin way of working, and also to ensure that the lawyers worked hand in glove with the GT Docs team, and that there was no sort of impact on the actual quality of that sort of work. So a lot to be done. It actually took us 9 months to deliver on this particular project, or 10 months to implement the project, and there was intense planning. So we went back and forth. It was lots of different meetings, getting people comfortable about using resources that are not only located in Australia and also overseas, and to make sure that we actually have all the quality controls and all the processes in place to enable us to deliver effectively and efficiently. It really did sort of meet all expectations. It was really difficult, and we had a long list of items that we needed to go through. But here's some stats for you. Just after the first 9 months after implementation, it surpassed initial utilisation estimates by 150%. And I think what was really interesting over here is, if I can, refer to a quote which is used quite regularly by, Mother of Invention, is the necessity of need is, when you need to invent what you need. Sorry, I just lost my place completely over there. Let me just go back. Sorry. So basically, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think that is absolutely critical over here, in that there was such a need that we identified as part of the GT Docs team, that really the lawyers were in such demand because we had such an increase in the volume of work in litigation as well as regulatory, that they came and used the unit. And I think had the demand not have been there, it might have been a slightly different story. So the lawyers were really in need of this. And as a result, I think we really surpassed all initial utilisation estimates. In the first 9 months, we were involved in 27 projects totaling over 73 local document reviewers in those first 9 months, and also 50 offshore document reviewers as well. And our core local team responsible for managing the document review grew from 2 to 9. And what was really interesting is, how I mentioned previously around the fact that you needed to scale quite quickly over a period of very short periods of time. We scaled up to 25 local resources and 24 offshore resources within 48 hours. And what we've also done is we've introduced a lot of sort of knowledge management around the actual document review process. So we've got over 10 precedents, and some of them have been iterated 15 and 20 times. So how do we actually manage this change? I think something that was absolutely key, as I said, is we really were solving a problem that needed to be solved. And we had done our appropriate sort of due diligence and really were quite planful in the way in which we approached this particular unit. We got that senior buy-in very early on, and we explained both the pros and the cons, but we really sought buy-in around the actual operational design, what again were those key pain points, and we did a lot of process mapping exercises to understand what those pain points are that we knew we were solving for the right issues. In terms of stakeholder engagement, we were speaking to relevant, and there's lots of different parties within the organisation. Obviously, there were the partners, but there were certainly all the lawyers that were involved in it. There were lots of the paralegals and juniors that were involved in this type of work. HR were involved because typically they were the ones who actually recruited teams prior to the way in which we are doing it now. But we needed their buy-in because obviously we needed to work hand in glove with HR to enable us to have that surge capability and also bring in resources at a very short period of time. We were constantly focused on change management and communication was absolutely key. So even towards the back end, when we were actually implementing GT Docs, we had drop-in sessions where lawyers could come and talk to us about what their issues were and how it might be solved using the new GT Docs unit. We sent out pamphlets, so people had a really good understanding as to exactly what the capability was of GT Docs and how they can actually help the lawyers. On the actual day when we launched it back in August 2019, again, there was lots of sort of, pamphlets being dropped on people's tables and emails going to them so that people really had a good idea as to what was coming. We did actual virtual sessions as well because, for people that were remote when we actually sort of launched it, but then obviously in the office as well to the extent that it was permissible. We have continuous improvement embedded as part of this actual unit. So we are constantly iterating. We're constantly looking at ways of improving it. Obviously, as like anything, there were some areas that needed improvement. We didn't expect to be as busy as what we were, in the first 9 months. So we thought that there'd still be some continuous sort of planning and we could evolve things. But we really hit the ground running just because the lawyers were so busy. But that iteration and evolution is ongoing, and it will be ongoing for an extended period of time. So I thought I'd leave you with that little sort of picture down the bottom, which really is around, people are so busy, and that's really what we experienced over here. The lawyers were so busy with the volume of litigation and regulatory. We could have actually said, you know what, everyone's too busy, we'll leave it. But we went there, we sort of tried to put something in place that would have a massive impact, and it certainly met all expectations.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Caryn. So one way transformational leaders succeed is by delivering something that is useful and needed, which is a good tip. And we have our first question. Thanks very much to Andrew, which is a question for you, Caryn, that if you had to do it again, what would you do differently?
What would I do differently? I would ensure that there wasn't as much work when we first launched something. I think truly a pilot would have been ideal. And under normal circumstances, I would absolutely support doing a pilot. I think given the nature of the transformation we were dealing with, so we basically stood up a brand new team, it was very difficult to sort of pilot anything. I think probably what one learning is you also need to know how much is too much. And even though we were able to sort of scale appropriately, we had so much work coming into us in those first few sort of weeks and months that actually probably what I could have done at that point in time is said, you know what, we are absolutely at capacity and we shouldn't take on any more work. In saying that, it's really difficult. But I think that's something that I would sort of think about in terms of, is there a way that you can have sort of less work coming into a team that is new? Not always possible, but you need to know when you've actually reached that threshold.
Great, thanks very much. I've got a question for Verity, but I might save that one till a little bit later when we've finished some of these other presentations so that you can all have a shot at answering it. So Laura, over to you for an example of how you've demonstrated transformational leadership at Nest Legal.
We're a far smaller operation, and I've chosen an example which is probably at the other end of the scale as well, which was something we needed to get up and running probably between 24 hours and a week within identifying the problem. And that is for when COVID first hit and we transitioned the whole office to be working from home. And we realised that our usual way of communicating within the firm to each other just wasn't working. So the problem that we identified that we needed to solve was not that we didn't have the technology, because we've always been a very tech-forward firm with some people who had been working remotely previously. So we had WhatsApp, we had the messaging channels, we had a cloud-based system, paperless firms, VoIP phones, all of that. But what we didn't have was some rules in place about how to use it in this new normal. And we needed to put it in place very quickly because we're a pretty busy firm at the best of times. We do conveyancing, wills and family. We're a high volume, high transaction firm, so the phone's always ringing and the inbox is always going off. And when we moved all the communications that were otherwise happening within the office into that online model as well, we just couldn't hear what was going on, and the messages that needed to get through to people just weren't getting through at the right time. Adding in there that it wasn't really ideal circumstances that we were dealing with anyway, because the internet was really challenged by everyone moving to work from home, as were phone lines as well. So even if your client did actually manage to get through to the lawyer they wanted to speak to, their mobile phones were dropping out or our VoIP connections were dropping out. So we needed to put some rules. We needed to control what we could control, which was how we communicated within the 15 members we had at that point in time, how we communicated, so we weren't challenging the systems that we had in place to be able to talk to our clients. So that was the problem, and I think we were all on the same page that we needed to come up with a solution pretty quickly. But the reason I chose this example is that as a small firm that I've created out of my imagination, I suppose I had the luxury that I'm not dealing with entrenched thinking that's been there for 50 years. So it's pretty rare that we've had this situation where we've had to make some major changes pretty quickly and there was disagreement about what those changes would be. So we all clearly agreed that there was a problem and it probably wasn't a sustainable way to run a law firm when clients couldn't actually get through to their lawyer. But there was a fair bit of disagreement as to what rules to put in place to fix that. So we didn't start by I appreciated there was going to be a fair bit of disagreement within the firm as to how we would solve this. So I didn't start by going straight into the nitty-gritties. I started by defining the overall goal that we were trying to achieve here, which was that the right message got through to the right person at the right time so we could actually keep this business moving. And I tied that back to our values as well. We're a pretty values-led organisation. It's something we reiterate in everything we do. And that's making it easy for clients, working well as a team and finding a better way to do things. So I had everyone up to that point. I had everyone in agreement that clients should be able to speak to who they need to speak to at the right time, and the right conversations need to be happening at the right time. And everyone was on board with the values and why this was an overall good thing to achieve. So I think framing it in terms of that meant when we then got into the discussion about, well, how are we actually going to do this? We were all sort of starting from some things that we were agreeing about. So to go through and actually identify what we were going to do, we just looked at all the different types of conversations that need to happen within the four walls of a law firm to make it happen. and keep it moving, and then look at what platforms we had been using, and then look at which of the technological platforms that we had was the best one for that. And some guiding principles that we had probably 80% buy-in to, I've put there down the bottom. We've always tried to minimise email use for internal comms within our firm. I'm sure that property lawyers listening today will appreciate the volume of emails that conveyancing lawyers get. And we also tried to minimise the use of the phone for internal communication, because we were taking so many calls from clients at such a frantic time, and because Victoria's phone lines were already overburdened. We also wanted to create the right spaces for the right people to have the types of discussions that needed to happen. And not all of those discussions were urgent discussions. Some of them were important but not urgent discussions. And I'm putting sort of well-being and mental health in that category, because they were really important discussions to have as we were transitioning a whole workforce from working in the office to working from home. And the correct avenues to have those discussions weren't all of office meetings or all of office WhatsApp channels. And as a general principle, that's a good one for life. If things are changing quickly and are uncertain, err on the side of over-communicating rather than under-communicating. So they were the principles. Everyone kind of agreed on the goal, and most people agreed on those guiding principles. And then we just had to design the solution. And a lot of the initial pushback that I had when I said, guys, you have to stop calling each other all the time because clients can't actually get through to, deal with what was going on in their head being the most urgent thing they had dealt with that year. So that was a pretty controversial viewpoint to put out there, but when I framed it in terms of that, people came on board a bit better. So this is probably the fifth draft, and I thought I would share it because a lot of offices are still working from home. We're 70% back in the office, 30% still remote at the moment. Just the nature of the beast that we deal with, which is wills and conveyancing, because of testamentary capacity and the limited COVID signing legislation meant that we had to come back a lot earlier than other law firms. But this is what we ended up with, and this is probably the fifth iteration of it because we didn't get it perfect the first time. We do a whole firm huddle in the morning, so it's a 10-minute just check in, who needs what that day, who needs help from their colleagues to be able to finish work on time, the kind of things that you would probably mention if you'd seen someone in person, but those conversations weren't happening. From that whole firm huddle, we triage into some teams did this, some teams didn't. Just a smaller huddle to triage any work that had come in overnight. And that dealt with a lot of the conversations that were happening about, what do we charge with this matter? And, do we have a conflict here? And you acted for his mum last time, didn't you? That was all dealt with in that huddle. We then created 3 WhatsApp channels. Now, WhatsApp, back in March last year, was the best tool for the job. It was secure. It worked on everyone's devices. It was relatively foolproof. And it was reliable when internet wasn't great. We had a quite sophisticated messaging system through our practice management software, but it relied on everyone having perfect internet, which in March and April last year people didn't. So we're using WhatsApp. We're looking into that now if that still is the best channel in light of the current developments. But in March last year, it was fit for purpose. And we had the 3 team channels and then 1 whole firm channel, which was for that chit chat, which was for cat photos, kid photos. What are you having for lunch? Gee, I'm having a bad day. That we created a channel for that conversation because that conversation is important. File-related correspondence happened on the legal practice management software, followed up by a WhatsApp saying, hey, I've sent you something on Communicate. If you knew that person was sort of residing in an internet bad spot area. If you want someone to do something, create a task for them to do it. Don't just let it get lost in a WhatsApp chat. We created the expectation that people should clear their tasks and check all their messages daily. That was controversial as well. No one likes being in a WhatsApp channel all day, but we are a firm that operates as a team on fast-paced transactions a lot of the time. We need to talk, and we needed to put some lines in the sand as to what was expected of people in this new way of working. And then the last 2 were the non-urgent but important ones that we were getting lost in the wash of all the rapid change to work from home. but we dedicated a 15-minute check-in with our Director of People and Culture, who called each person in the firm on the phone. They would go for a walk and just say, hey, how you going? You know, what's going on in your life at the moment that you don't feel comfortable bringing up in your team huddle or your whole firm huddle? What do you need from me to be able to do your job this week? And that changed every month last year. Just so there was some sort of bring your whole self to work, but not in any of those other forums, which wasn't quite the same as a chat you might have over a cup of tea if you were in the office. And the last one, Friday drinks at 4:30. I probably don't need to explain why that's important. But we did it through Zoom, and you know, Zoom drinks have their challenge, but it was something that people needed last year. So we put that as part of our internal comms protocol. Look, the reason this isn't a dramatic program of change, but I think it was a really neat case study of a good way to bring about change in an organisation, just because of the methodology that we used. We quickly identified the problem. We didn't brush it under the carpet going, oh, it's COVID, it's cool. No one expects to get through to their lawyer. No, this was a big problem to our firm that prides itself on responsiveness if clients couldn't actually get through to the person they wanted to speak to. So we called it early, and then we shifted the conversation to making sure everyone was on the same page about the overall goal that we wanted to achieve. So even if we didn't have 100% buy-in immediately about the methodology, we had a sort of a majority buy-in that the goal was a worthy one. And then we designed a solution, and the first draft was probably about 70% correct. But I was humble enough to know that it wouldn't be perfect, and to invite feedback and criticism and to speak up if something wasn't working. And then we were receptive to those tweaks, and we made those changes straight away. And then we'd go around saying, all right, this is the rules for this week. We're going to try it this way. And I'm going to finish up with the last thing that we didn't do, because this is a legal tech conference. We didn't get distracted by the technology. So we didn't go, oh, look at all these tech tools at our disposal. Let's use all of them to create this fabulous system of communicating with each other. We looked at what are the conversations we needed to have? Why were those conversations important to us as a firm with the values that we held dear? And then we chose the tech tools that helped us achieve that. And usually that was the minimum tech tool that would achieve the job, because we were in an environment when the internet wasn't great, and it needed to be a tool that everyone across the firm could use, not just the most tech savvy ones. So I hope that's helpful.
Great, thanks very much, Laura. And I certainly got one of the points out of there is making sure you get the right message to the right people at the right time, and that's very important from a transformational leadership perspective. There are a few questions for you on the chat. So I was thinking maybe we go to Verity's one about she's intrigued by the whole team huddle, and she's heard different approaches on this and varying success. And do you capture the output and keep it anywhere?
So this huddle is really going around the room, and we choose one of our more charismatic lawyers, which is not me, to host it each day. And as we go around, we say, what are you doing? What have you got on today, and what help do you need from your colleagues? It's not a discussion about you agree to do this. It's just it's letting people know that you're under the pump and you might be a bit snappy that day, or you have capacity to help other people. So it's not actually about, we're not sort of making big decisions in those whole firm huddles. There's 15 people in there. It's really just like a traffic light test for people's emotions and well-being that day, and sort of resourcing as well.
And Kay's asked a couple of questions about if you decided if any roles couldn't be performed remotely, and if you were a paperless firm.
We are a paperless firm in that we run ourselves paperless, but we do conveyances, which sometimes involves elderly clients bringing in their paper titles. And the legislation that the Victorian Parliament gave us allows us to witness probably 70% of estate planning documents electronically, which means that there's a whole lot of people that didn't have their medical treatment decision maker documents witnessed during COVID. So it was actually easy or easier during full COVID lockdown to say, I'm sorry, we actually cannot meet with your 95-year-old grandmother and assess her capacity because we are not allowed to, or we cannot come into the office to do that. It is more difficult now that we're in this limbo stage, because there are some jobs that can be performed purely remotely and some that just can't. And that's to do with the fact that not all of our client base are tech enabled. We have an elderly client base. Whilst we talk a lot to working families, we also help their parents as well, and they weren't super comfortable with a lot of the technology, and the roles in our firm that help support those members of our client base, we do need to have in the office.
Great. And there's probably a question that's both for, I think, Laura and Caryn at the moment, in terms of working from home security and in terms of how that's maintained. If the connections from home, was there protocols in place to do that?
We sort of we asked our lawyers to use the same common sense that they would, that if a client called their mobile and they were on the tram, if it's not an appropriate location to have that conversation, then they wouldn't do that. I'm guessing that's what that's about in terms of video conferencing and people walking in, as opposed to sort of the security of home servers, in which case Caryn might be better placed to answer that, because you have with the off-site team.
Yeah, so we have dedicated systems that with Elevate, given we've got a partnership with them already, we have part of our technology team there anyway. So we have got, they basically use the exact same infrastructure and the exact same systems as we do onshore. So security is absolutely paramount. And certainly from a work from home, there are guidelines that we provided to our lawyers from when COVID obviously hit, that you obviously need to, again, provide some common sense and, only engage in conversations which are suitable to be engaged, given if there are people around or the like. So there are definitely protocols, and certainly from a security point of view, the systems would look identical to what they'd look like, in the office in Sydney, Melbourne or Perth. Okay,
great. So Laura, if you'd like to stop sharing your screen and we'll move on to Kate, because I know that Justice Connect has played a slightly different sort of transformational role, and it'd be really interesting to hear from your perspective.
Great, thank you. It's really interesting speaking third, because there's definitely some common threads between our three presentations, although I come at the change journey from a slightly different perspective from an organisation called Justice Connect. So my name's Kate Fazio. I'm Head of Innovation and Engagement at Justice Connect. And just before I go any further with my presentation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all gathered today and pay respects to elders past and present. So a little bit of context about Justice Connect first. We're an Australian charity. We operate nationally. We have offices in Melbourne and Sydney, but we're also located pre-COVID in a whole range of co-locations at courts and hospitals and community outreach settings, as well as our two main head offices. So our purpose is articulated on this screen, and it is to design high impact interventions to increase access to legal support and social justice. We help both individuals as our clients and community organisations as our clients. And we do that because we know that the legal problems experienced by both individuals and community organisations have significant impacts that affect our community, and that if we provide legal support at different points in those legal problem journeys, we can have a really positive impact on our community. So we are an interdisciplinary organisation, which is a bit of an evolution that we've made. We started out as a bunch of lawyers, but over the years we have brought in other professions into our organisation, which include designers, developers, social workers, financial counsellors, lots of different disciplines. Really critical to our service model and the way that we deliver support to the community is our network of pro bono lawyers. We have 50 member law firms who work with us to provide services, and we also work with another 110 law firms, so over 160 in total, that engage with Justice Connect to provide pro bono services to the community. So how do I fit in at Justice Connect? I've been at the organisation since 2012, so I'm beginning to feel like a bit of a barnacle, nearly 8.5 years there. And in that time, I've had a few roles. And the role that's most relevant to today is a role I took on in 2016, which was our Manager of Digital Innovation Strategies role, a role that we created in 2016. And that role then went on to be transformed into the role that I currently have as Head of Innovation and Engagement. The organisation's purpose that I've just described enshrines a lot of what we have learnt through the transformation process that I've been involved in since that role was created in 2016. And it really shows where we have landed as an organisation, I think. Our purpose was not articulated in this way in 2016, and this is one of the products of the change journey that we have been on. So I can't speak to that whole complex journey. It's very multifaceted in 10 minutes, but I'm going to quickly outline one of the digital transformation projects that I led in that 4-year period, and speak to some of our strategies and approaches that helped make that project a success, and also help take this organisation on that broader change journey as part of this project. So back in 2016, there were some things that we all knew at Justice Connect. They were commonly understood. Millions of Australians miss out on legal assistance each year, and for many of those Australians, there are really significant impacts on their lives because they miss out on that help. We know that legal aid is underfunded. 14% of Australians generally fall below the poverty line, but only 8% of Australians get legal aid. So there's a real mismatch there. There's clearly all of this unmet need. We knew as well, in the context of this enormous unmet need in the community, our pro bono network, all those law firms that we work with, were telling us we can do more. We were experiencing a bottleneck at Justice Connect, being able to engage with that huge, vast number of people with unmet legal needs, capture that and find a way to connect it up with that pro bono capacity. It's not a struggle that just Justice Connect experiences. This is an issue across the whole legal assistance ecosystem. How do you take this unmet need in all of its complexity, manage it, and point people into the right direction, connect them up with the best and the most appropriate service? It's a really complex problem. So we also had identified that we were ready to scale up. We wanted to scale up. We were in a position to scale up. And one of the key barriers was our own complexity as an organisation that was sitting alongside this ecosystem complexity. So there was complexity everywhere. And every time the organisation tried to scale up an initiative, we would butt up against this complexity. Part of the complexity was a reaction to the ecosystem complexity. So our organisational processes had followed that messy ecosystem. And part of it was also because we didn't necessarily have the best systems and processes in place. And so our teams had created these workarounds. There's a fantastic saying called "don't pave the cow path," which is, if you're going to do a digital transformation project, don't just digitize the status quo. Make sure that you recognize these winding paths that have been created over the years and try to cut through. And that is absolutely what had happened at Justice Connect. For some very good and fair reasons, our teams had created these winding processes that were frustrating to everyone involved because they were working around various constraints. And so we wanted to take the opportunity to cut through that, and we saw that as a way that we could start to scale up. If we could reduce that internal complexity, we could speed up, we could handle more volume. So we started a project at the end of 2016 called our Gateway Project. And through that project, we aimed to better understand these challenges and to better design some solutions that would support resolving them. And what we did was we ran a 12-month human-centered design research process. We were really lucky to get some seed funding from Google to support this work. And so we ran this very sophisticated, in-depth 12-month process where we engaged with all of the end users of Justice Connect. So whether that was our staff, the people who reach out to us for assistance, the people who actually receive assistance from us, that people who touch Justice Connect through that messy ecosystem, so courts, other legal service providers, and of course the pro bono lawyers that we're working with as well. We engaged with all of these users extensively, and as we gathered more intel, we started to test ideas with them with low fidelity prototypes, and then increasingly high fidelity prototypes to really interrogate, if we did A, B, C, we would come with hypotheses. If we did this, would it make a difference? And so we did that exercise for 12 months. And at the end of that process, we came up with a plan to create a product ecosystem that we thought would fundamentally change the way that Justice Connect worked, that would make Justice Connect a better experience for everyone involved, and that would help us scale up. So this is where the project ended up. It was around a 3-year project. So we identified a range of areas where we could do better and where technology could play a role in making improvements. So we also identified that we needed tech to be helping in specific ways, that we had some really specific things we needed the tech to do for us in our context. We weren't a business. We weren't looking for a tech platform that would support us to bill our clients. And we realized that there were no off-the-shelf products that supported our business model, our organizational model. So we ended up deciding that in order to meet our needs, we were going to have to build some things. So we created an in-house innovation team with designers, developers, and we started building. So we created 3 core products that sort of sit as our key product architecture. We have an online intelligent intake system that helps people get a sense of whether they're going to be eligible, and if it's looking like they might be eligible, takes them through a guided online application process. 97% of people who were calling Justice Connect were not ultimately eligible for our services, and we were spending 20 minutes on average with each of those people, which was a real waste of time for them, very frustrating, and a waste of time for us as well. So by creating this intake system, we were cutting through that. We were helping people identify really quickly and early that Justice Connect was not the appropriate organisation for them, and providing them with some suggestions about where else they could go. It's significantly reduced the burden of intake and triage at Justice Connect, and our consumers are actually finding the experience of Justice Connect to be better because of it. They rate the tool 4.4 out of 5 on average, and they actually rate it that highly even if they get rejected. So there's not a disparity between how that tool is rated between the people that get bumped off and the people that get allowed through. So they are clearly valuing that clear, direct process that enables them to get an outcome quickly. The next tool that we have in the ecosystem is quite similar. It's an online referrer tool. So it goes to this ecosystem complexity, and it helps at the organisations that we work with regularly send clients to us where we are the most appropriate service to be assisting. Often another organisation might identify someone that would be better assisted by Justice Connect, and in the past they would just provide them with our phone number, and there was very significant dropout. That person might just give up. It's too hard. I've already told 3 people my story. I can't be bothered. And their problem would just escalate. So by creating this online facilitated referral pathway, we have built trust with our sector peers. They get a clear sense of whether this person's going to be eligible for our help, and then they can make that facilitated referral through to Justice Connect, and we provide a clear response about what the outcome was as well. And then the final product that we created is our pro bono portal, and this is a product that we designed to help intermediate between Justice Connect and all those firms and pro bono lawyers, that enormous pool of resources that we have at our disposal to help with that bottleneck, that efficiency point. So once we get all this unmet need through and we've triaged it and we've worked out who needs what, we then need to place these potential pro bono cases with pro bono lawyers. And that traditionally was done by emailing one firm at a time, giving them a few days to reply back. It was a very inefficient process. We now have a very sophisticated platform that handles this. It provides our staff with a whole range of options for how they want to engage with firms. It algorithmically matches pro bono opportunities with firms. It also does curated automated alerts, all kinds of things that manage down the burden of that matching piece, but also provide quite a lot of flexibility and control to our lawyers, which is sometimes really necessary in the more complex matters. So all those products were live by mid-2019, which was extremely fortuitous because 2020 turned out to be quite the year, as we all know. And in the legal assistance sector, there were 2 compounding disasters that came in quick succession. We had the bushfire crisis, followed by COVID. And what we were able to do when the bushfires happened is the pro bono community broadly said, we want to help as much as we possibly can. What can we do? And we created a series of coalitions in different states, which involved community legal centres, legal aid, pro bono, and it was agreed that Justice Connect would coordinate the pro bono response nationally. And at this point in time, 110 law firms joined the portal, that we ended up with 163 firms on the portal, and all matters related to the bushfire crises were allocated to pro bono via the portal through a specially created distribution process. It is a living example of the way that tech lets you scale. Had we not put these new systems and processes in place, we would not have been in a position to offer to do that coordination piece, because it just would have been too burdensome and frankly impossible at that scale without this supportive technology. So this is a really good working example of the value of these types of tech systems. With COVID, again, a very different crisis with a very different profile, but also creating unmet legal need in the community. But in this example, rather than a boots on the ground approach, which is the general approach in a bushfire setting, people were looking for help online for some very obvious reasons. So we knew that we needed to make sure that our online entry points were being heavily promoted, that they were working well, that it was very easy to apply for assistance at Justice Connect. And we launched an online outreach campaign, and between January and June, we saw a staggering 470% increase in engagement with our online resources and application pages. So just absolutely staggering. And again, that increase in scale, 470%, if you did not have some tech systems sitting underneath that, there's no way that you would be able to handle, as a not-for-profit like Justice Connect, without an enormous injection of resources, you wouldn't be able to handle that level of scale. So just a really quick snapshot of some of the stats, reflecting on 2020 and on that 6 months where these twin crises hit. These stats show what having these scalable tech solutions in place at that point in time enabled us to do. We had 110 law firms join, 41% increase in web traffic, 470% increase in use of our self-help resources, 30% increase in online applications, a 50% increase in pro bono referrals, and we also launched an online training service which had over 4,000 people attend training sessions in that period. So compared to Justice Connect's profile back in 2016, this is a very different looking organisation. So how did we get there? And I will say, just like Caryn and Laura have said, we are very much still on a journey. But we've reflected on what was the approach and what has supported our organisation to go on this change journey. And there's a few key things that have underpinned our approach. It's that we have taken this fundamentally human-centred, data and evidence-driven approach. We build a thing, we make a change when we have very strong evidence that shows that that's likely to work. We're evaluative and we're iterative. So we don't just make the change and set and forget. We have a hypothesis that if we make a change, it will make things better, but we test that. So we make the change and we always test and we keep testing, because if the change is not making things better, then we need to wind it back or change things further. We're open and accountable, which is very linked to this evaluation and iteration, but within our organisation and outside of our organisation, we share our research findings. We involve our end users in our design, so our products are higher quality and also our end users feel some ownership over them. We leverage tech where we can, and where possible, we try to make system level changes. So if there's a way that we can integrate one of our products with another organisation's products to create a better ecosystem, we will do that if possible. So we're always looking at how do our products sit alongside our peers? How do they make a contribution to the ecosystem? Are they having a net benefit on the ecosystem as a whole? Because it's the ecosystem that our help seekers are engaging with, not just Justice Connect. Just by way of example, here is a quick snapshot of the amount of human-centered design research and user engagement we did in that 12-month process. So you can see here that there was really significant commitment to that engagement, and I think that meant that we were then armed down the track to really persuade and help in that change process. Another thing that was really valuable in the project is when we set out in 2016 and we said, we're going to make some changes around here, it was difficult to have that conversation when we couldn't say with certainty exactly what those changes were going to be. Because the message that we were communicating was, we're about to go and do some research, and we think that that research is going to point in the direction of us making some changes. So a big lesson for us is in a legal organisation, it can take time to build comfort with projects that don't have a clearly articulated output or really clearly articulated milestones. And I have found that this cone of possibilities is a very helpful tool in explaining to people that as we go through time, we will narrow down the cone of possibilities and we will reach points in this project where we can then say with more certainty what the next point looks like. But we all have to have some tolerance for that process. What you can articulate is your aims, what people care about, the mission, and what you're concerned to improve. So if you can articulate that, then you can help to build comfort in the process, to trust the process, that there will be a good outcome if you have a good process. This slide is, I'm going to say some really broad comments that can be easily challenged and unpicked. So I want to note this. But we heard a lot of assumptions articulated by lawyers in our project, lawyers inside Justice Connect and lawyers outside Justice Connect. These statements were said with such confidence, even though the statement makers had no data to support them. They were said with such confidence. Old people don't use the internet, poor people don't use the internet, poor people don't have smartphones. Everybody already understands what we do. Lawyers don't have capacity to do more pro bono. Everyone prefers asking for help on the phone because it's more personal. Each of these statements, based on the enormous amount of data that we have, is factually incorrect and can be unpicked with real data. But they were made with such certainty and confidence. So some traits about lawyers that I've noted, they're generally trained to follow precedent. They often look back. They're highly analytical, but they're analytical on an anecdotal basis. So they're often looking at single cases or single stories rather than taking a data-driven meta-analysis approach. And so as opposed to a statistician or a medical researcher who's looking at the big picture and the trend data and the numbers as a whole, lawyers are particularly interested in the edge cases and but there was this one time where this person, so there's some particular traits that can be challenging when you are taking an evidence-based decision-making frame to a project. But the more data you have and the more you've invested in that, the easier it is to then have a respectful conversation with someone who is making statements, to unpick those statements by showing them the data that you have access to, even introducing them to, in some circumstances, the participants in your project who might help to unpick some of those assumptions on your behalf. So really the message is real data from real people is the antidote to problematic assumptions that can be made by lawyers and that can be blockers to progress. The last point I would make is, and it's one that Caryn has spoken to, is we find if we release MVPs, it helps to build trust. So building and releasing MVPs as opposed to trying to do a big bang approach is important for a few reasons. So if you start releasing products early, it can help you validate whether you're heading in the right direction before you've invested too much in that product. It's a good risk management approach because you're much less likely to overinvest in an idea if you're releasing things really early and validating them. And it lets you pivot early. It's also really valuable from a change management perspective. It's an important way to bring people along. So if you're releasing things early and then iterating them, you're giving your users and your stakeholders lots of opportunities to provide feedback, lots of opportunities to participate in the design process, and lots of opportunities to ease their anxiety that there is going to be this big bang and they're never going to get a say in what it looks like. Through your process, you help to build trust by showing that you do listen, that you're open, that you take on the feedback, and that you will change the product based on what you're hearing, that you're not just going to dogmatically push something through, you will respond to what your users are telling you. Ultimately, those users then start to take ownership of the project. They start to see the product reflect things that they've said, and they become advocates for your product or your project. So there's so many reasons to approach a project like this from a change management perspective. That's it from me. I will hand back over to Alison. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Kate. And there's a couple of pretty specific questions about some of the things that you were talking about. So if you want to head over to the Q&A and answer some of those directly in the typing the answer option. And there's a couple actually I think that have turned up on the chat as well. So if I can get you just to unshare your screen. And the thing that I sort of picked up, particularly in Kate's session, was all about the importance of really understanding the problem to be solved before you even start. And again, that getting real data from real people to help make that change actually happen. So many thanks to all of you. As you've all heard, each of our panel have demonstrated experience in delivering real transformation change. So now it's time to quiz them, and let's delve a little deeper in how we too might be able to achieve these remarkable results and ask our panel a few questions. So I will start out with that question from Verity, and it might even be, aside from necessity being the mother of all invention, Verity wanted to know, what are your top tips for prioritising ideas and or features for innovation work? So maybe, Laura, do you have any top tips for how you prioritise your ideas?
My youngest child started school last week, so I've just come off 5 years of looking at a massive to-do list and going, if I can do 3 things that are going to have the most impact here and make my life that much easier, what will that be? That's what I do, really. You know, what are the 20% of things that are going to have the 80% of impact, which often isn't the fanciest, shiniest things, and it's a numbers game as well. If you're seeing the same problem over and over again. On a really simple level, we started fixing a lot of our precedents during COVID when the property market shut down. For the first time in 7 years, we actually had time to breathe in our property law team. So we started with our precedents. A really basic example, we started with the precedents we used the most, and we had the numbers on that. And then we worked down to the precedents that we used the least. A document that you're going to use 100 times a month, you're going to have more savings and efficiency than a document that you only use, say, 5 times a month.
And Caryn, did you have any top tips for how you prioritise ideas and features for innovation work to drive that sort of transformational change?
Yeah, look, it's quite similar to Laura. In saying that, though, if I reflect on GT Docs was quite transformational in that it was a significant component of what the litigation as well as our regulatory lawyers did on a day-to-day basis. And I really feel like the impact you can have on something as transformative as that is quite significant. In saying that, though, I'm also very pro having the quick wins along the way. But certainly, you know, we've experimented over the last 5 years with doing stuff like GT Docs, which is, as I said, like quite transformational in nature, and then doing the, development of a particular tool that does a particular part of a broader process. And yes, you get really great efficiencies in, for example, we developed smart search tools for diligence. We've got some really incredible efficiencies off the back of that. But I'm also very conscious it is a very tiny component in a broader process. So what I look for at the moment is thinking about where we can make that impact and where it will have a really big impact on our lawyers' sort of lives and working sort of days. So certainly, yeah, that impact and using data to experiment with that. In saying that, though, those change projects are normally much longer and take much longer time, which obviously makes perfect sense. I mean, GTDocs took us in excess of 10 months. So you do want to have those quick wins and you want to keep that momentum. But yes, I think more and more I see having to focus on those areas that make a really big difference.
Great. Thank you very much for that. I noticed that Melissa mentioned on the chat how pleased she is that we're highlighting the need to agree and articulate the purpose of a transformation and making sure we live the values and then actually design. And so we often hear that to really drive change, we need to engage the users, we need to get leadership support, we need to bring along everyone with us on the journey. But where do you actually start? What's the very first step you do to ensure your transformation project is a success? Caryn, did you want to start with that one?
I look at the data. I start collecting data internally before I even go and take it to leaders within the organisation, because for me, what's most important is I can actually make that case as to why one needs to transform. So part of that is showing empathy for what the lawyers need to experience on a day-to-day basis. So really putting ourselves in their shoes and really understanding what they're doing. But absolutely, for me, it's about collecting the data. So before I went to some of the other partners around the GTDocs team, we did our diligence and worked out exactly how many regulatory matters. We spoke to HR. We tried to work out how many paralegals or lawyers we got in overnight on particularly large matters. We started consulting with lawyers. So yes, for me, it's about collection of that data.
And Kate, I assume given how long that you spent with the funding from Google in advance, your answer might be similar, but what's the very first step that you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think before you go and invest in the way that we did in a whole year of design research, you get a sense that something's up, right? And that might be through looking at easily available data that you have at hand or through regular surveying that you're doing, whether that's of your clients or your staff. But there's way more light touch ways to start to kind of pull at the thread and see what's going on. But then there does come a point where once you have a hunch, you need to start testing and working out what exactly is going on there. And you need good data to really answer that question well. And it's not just data at the beginning. You then need to be testing. You can diagnose the problem, and then you also need to be working really hard to make sure that you're not just jumping straight into solution mode and that you're working out what the right solution is for that problem too.
Yeah, and I guess, Caryn, you spoke a little bit about, really understanding the need and the team needs and the pain points in advance. And I guess that is part of that, collecting the data. So how did you uncover, I guess, those pain points? Exactly what did you do, and how did that change your approach? And as Kate has sort of said, do you track any changes in the perception throughout the project as you go?
Yeah, so we definitely did. I mean, we did some process mapping up front with the lawyers to really understand where those pain points are so that we weren't making assumptions. Look, I obviously understand the broader process around litigation and regulatory, so we recognised that there was something that needed solving over there. So, to Kate's point, we had a high-level understanding that there was a pain point there, but we needed to uncover exactly what that looked like. And what was interesting, even the way in which we originally by having those conversations, what we did discover is obviously there is a 1RR, so first round review, and there is a second round review process as part of a broader document review. Originally, we were going to focus possibly on both. What that actually uncovered for us is that we only wanted to focus on the 1RR initially. So now we're in the midst of actually expanding out the actual use case for GTDocs to move into the second round review. But at that point in time, we also need to understand what levels of comfort there was. We needed to actually demonstrate that we were really successful in that first round review process for us to get the trust and for the lawyers to use the unit to then expand out into other offerings. So certainly, we did do that process mapping up front. We did really understand that problem. And I think, again, that empathy, and I can't sort of impress that upon, everyone enough. It really helped because it's not about solving a problem. Like, lawyers are under incredibly tight deadlines. They do the best in the current circumstances, but really putting yourselves in those shoes and sort of understanding that, we are going to try to help you sort of solve some of these issues is really absolutely critical.
Yeah, and I guess that empathy, and we'll touch on that a little bit later as well, but it's often part of what works to inspire teams and motivate change generally. So I was wondering, maybe Laura, have you found anything that works to inspire your team or motivate change? Is there a secret sauce?
I'm a fan of, there's a classic business book called Good to Great, which looks at a whole bunch of companies from the 60s to the 80s. And you have to sort of take it with a grain of salt because it's talking about, great cigarette companies and all of that. But one thing he does look at is businesses that have managed to grow in a sustained manner over a period of time and what they have in common and what they don't have in common. And he talks about this concept of a level 5 leader who isn't what we expect to be a leader. It's not necessarily the flashiest, most charismatic, most extroverted, shiny person. In these companies that he looked at, of the 1100, they had all the communication skills and the ability to communicate ideas and were hardworking, but they were often quiet and humble and just got things done. And after 7 years of imposter syndrome that you had to be this big shiny thing, I loved that. Because I am that, and as such I always have 10 spreadsheets ready to justify my decision, because I've never assumed my team will just take it because Laura says so. They'll do it because they know Laura has thought about this to the nth degree, and there are 23 spreadsheets and data to back up her decision. But I also keep focused. I roll right, if I'm trying to achieve something, I'll keep it written on a post-it note what we're actually trying to do. And a lot of Nest Legal successes haven't been because we've made great decisions. We've just made them faster than other law firms. And I think that's really helped with that. If we know that's where we want to be, you can quickly assess an opportunity or a pivot and go, does that fit with what we want or does it not quite fit? And it just means that we've been able to make those decisions a lot quicker than other firms.
And if all else fails with the Excel spreadsheets, because Laura said so, is still relevant.
Yeah.
Look, we know that that change is hard and it takes time. I was wondering, Kate, then maybe what's your advice on planning in terms of timelines and budgets, and how do you set out to stick to them, particularly in the area that you're working with Justice Connect?
Yeah, that's a big question. I've actually done a whole conference presentation on that in the budgeting for change projects in the not-for-profit.
Okay, well, we only have 20 minutes left, and
Yeah,
there's going to be more questions.
I think a big challenge, probably the biggest thing I would have to say is that if you want to follow a project framework like the one we've done at Justice Connect that truly has human-centered design baked into it and is truly iterative and allows for different possibilities depending on what your research shows, then your timelines and your budget need to be flexible to match, which is very challenging. But you're not going to do a proper human-centered design project if you also have a budget and a project plan that has these hard, rigid milestones. It's going to cost exactly this much to do this thing by this date. That's not human-centered design, because how could you possibly listen to the feedback that you get and adapt to your product while also following that budget and timeline that you've set out? So we've done a lot of work at Justice Connect with our funders to set out these flexible budgets and to create frameworks through which we report back, as well as internally to our board, to do stakeholder management around those flexible budgets. And the interesting thing is we often end up coming in under where we've estimated we might end up, because we take this iterative approach and it is actually quite efficient. So it's this agile approach as opposed to a waterfall approach to product development. But it definitely takes time to explain it conceptually to people who might be looking for a Gantt chart and a really clear budget, which you're not going to get in a human-centered design project like our Gateway project.
Sure. I think that it's often hard to measure innovation initiatives at the best of times. So certainly that's an interesting approach, and that reiterating all the way through the project is really important. So Caryn, how have you found, what's the best way of bringing along maybe those senior stakeholders, whether they're partners or clients or executives or investors even, for people like Laura? How do you bring them to the table to fund or champion or even just support those transformation initiatives? And, maybe on the flip side of that is, how do you convince the naysayers, or at the worst, I've had experiences where there's ones that agree in the room, yeah, that's a great idea, but the minute they're back at their desk, they're back to their old ways. How do you turn them?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, the main thing is trust. It's about ensuring that those that are wanting to engage in the actual, transformation actually trust the people that are going to be delivering on that transformation. And that's certainly something that I have seen. But I think how you can bring them along for that journey is also sort of benchmarking where you are against the broader environment. I mean, why do people engage within legal innovation transformation at the moment is because many competitors are engaging it, because your clients are
Caryn's audio's just
demanding it. So I think it's really important to them that, are you losing me?
No, it's your audio just drops out every now and then, but you're back now.
Am I back?
Keep going.
Okay. So yeah, getting the client's voice, I think, is absolutely critical, and that has certainly been very critical on our end. The clients really engaging and in innovation and transformation, both internally on their side, so really wanting to ensure that their in-house legal function is forward-thinking and has the right capabilities to meet the demands of the future. And then on the flip side, obviously pressures around cost and ensuring quality and ensuring efficiency and ensuring leveraging technology. So I think really, for senior stakeholders to have a true appreciation as to what's happening in the broader industry. And I think that's really important given the fact that, for example, myself, I immerse myself in this on a day-to-day basis. And I think one can't underestimate how much time and effort that takes to immerse yourself on a day-to-day basis. Many people actually don't understand the broader environment, and they might understand it in snippets, but really painting that entire picture has been really critical. And in terms of sort of the naysayers, those that don't necessarily want to come along for the journey, I personally reckon, and the way in which we've done it internally, is we've focused on the ones that are the change champions, that the ones that really believe in it. And what we found is actually those that don't believe in it follow suit. Pretty quickly, actually. And again, it's about looking for that opportunity where a client might have, said something, or, looking for an opportunity. Now, they said, your client is looking at this. I've seen them in a conference and they're interested in experimenting with X and Y, and taking it to them. So being really proactive with the naysayers and sort of saying, this is an opportunity for us, and let's see what we can do over them. But we put all effort first in those change champions, and the rest tend to follow in our experience.
There's nothing like a bit of peer pressure to bring people along, as well as a bit of client pressure to drive innovation and change. A couple of questions that I've often found helpful in bringing along senior leaders is actually to ask them, what do you currently do that already supports this change? Or what do you think you have to do differently to align with the change? And then make sure that their answers to those are both communicated through formal, but also the informal, the water cooler conversations. It really helps when those leaders are not just talking the talk, but walking it too. So I've talked a little bit about the kicking off the transformation. Let's talk about now more about continuing the journey and maintaining that momentum. And one of the questions that I was thinking of is, what's the most important thing a change leader that needs to do during the transformation journey? And Terry's flicked up a question on that, is about, how do you keep the magic going or manage innovation fatigue at either the individual or organisational level? Kate, did you want to have a crack at that one?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I think it probably depends. It's probably the answer is probably context specific. I think at Justice Connect, we have the benefit of being a purpose-driven organisation. So we always have that purpose to come back to, and it unifies us all. And there's never any debate about why anyone is coming to work at Justice Connect. We're all there for the same reason. So I think we're lucky in that sense, and it makes it quite a fertile ground for this innovation work, because people are so unified and committed to that purpose. but definitely there can be change fatigue, innovation fatigue. And also on the flip side, though, I think when you're doing lots of innovation, there can then be a desire that everyone wants to innovate. So you can actually have the opposite problem where suddenly everyone has an idea and everyone wants to innovate and no one wants to do business as usual anymore. So you can have the problem in both directions. So it's
I don't know. I reckon that's a pretty good problem to have.
Yeah. But it's about finding that equilibrium where you've got, the pace of change is going at the right pace. You've got sort of the right number of new things going that are happening, at a pace that the organisation can cope with. And I think it's been interesting to see, COVID has had a big impact on working life. And we've definitely had some conversations over the last 12 months about, does the pace of change need to change? Because life is changing and there's a lot more stress at the moment. But at the same time, our clients and the people that we are working to assist were having more problems than ever before. So generally our staff were very motivated and we actually sped up our change in 2020 rather than slowing it down, which is what I'd thought we might have to do. So I do think it is, it's context specific, but the other thing would be just making sure that you're always, you need that shared goal and then you need to be celebrating the wins. So people need to feel like you're doing it for a reason and you're communicating when you are making that progress and celebrating that, and then explaining why the next thing matters. I think at the end of the day, is explaining why it matters can help people get behind it and reduce that fatigue.
Yeah, so there's some great tips on how to pace the transformation journey, because often there is, a balance to desire. We all know what the end solution needs to be. We know what it looks like. We know how great it's going to be on the other side, but there's a need to balance that to bring people along at their own pace to do that. And Caryn, clearly you've done that, with a 10-month project and checking in all the way along as you've done that. One of the things... Yeah, sorry, Caryn, go ahead.
I was going to weigh in there. One other thing that we've done that we found to be really successful is we recognise that sometimes people are fatigued and, they're working already, long hours and they're busy, and sometimes innovation can feel like, if it's not part of their core role, it can feel like something additional to their core role. So what we tried to do a couple of years ago is we actually implemented a new program called Project Invigorate. And that allows lawyers to take a certain amount of innovation hours per year, and it just looks like billable hours, and no one knows the difference. So we're trying to normalise it, and we're still within the billable hours sort of framework. So given that's where we are, we've sort of moved away and sort of said, well, you know what, this is business as usual. So you should think about it as business as usual. And I think that certainly from our perspective has removed a bit of that innovation and sort of real fatigue around, this is new and we've got to do that mindset around this is on top of our current work and on top of what we have to do. It's just about, this is part of the way we do things. And we've certainly found that to be incredibly successful.
Yeah, I certainly think changing things into this is something new to this is just the way we do things around here is critically important. I think it's really important to make sure that we look at what happens when things go wrong. So people often avoid change, but I know, Laura, that you've had some experience on what resistance to change really does look like and maybe how you overcame it. And it's not necessarily what we first think. Did you want to have a chat about that?
I suppose I've had the luxury that I get to choose who I hang out with here. So there's not too much pushback on that. There's a bit of confusion, I think, when people first join Nest that they're asked for their opinion on how to do things so often, and they think it's a trick or some sort of weird initiation process, and it's not. We're always questioning how to do things better. There isn't much sort of pushback within our actual organisation. I think change is hard and often needs quite a bit of hard work, and that does affect the people who are in your personal life. And I think you need to bring them on board as well when you're going into a new big change, that, you might be a bit more unavailable, and this is what you're thinking about, and this is why Mummy is really excited to go to work today, and this is why I'm working on this thing late into the night. So I think there's stakeholders involved, because change isn't easy. Change needs extra hours sometimes. I think that's another aspect of pushback that needs to be managed by change makers.
Sure. And maybe Kate, then, what happens when something fails? How do you recover or pivot or start over? How do you re-rally the team to try all over again?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's interesting because in our Gateway project, nothing has failed. So it's not really something that we've had to deal with. But I think that's because we hardwired all these checks and balances into the project, so it was kind of fail-safe. If you do prototyping, if you do MVP release, if you're doing all those things, then you shouldn't fail. You should have enough points in your project where you get the opportunity to reflect, so that you can pivot. So I guess perhaps what we experience is maybe you occasionally get some unexpected feedback, or that's a little bit inconsistent with what you were expecting, but we just try to approach that with the attitude of, how interesting is that? That's completely outside of the box, and that it's new insights. It's a new type of user experience that you need to be catering for if your product is going to work. So I think having that curiosity, having that sense of, I'm trying to build something that meets these needs, then if you have that openness, things shouldn't be successes or failures. You're always just learning and tinkering. I think and I think that goes for service design as well. You can tinker with things, move things from being a phone base to an online base and things like that, and you will often find out things and then tinker with that. But yeah, as long as you're testing, trialing, getting the data early, you shouldn't have to fail and crash and burn in a big way. You should be just constantly adjusting the settings.
There's a couple of comments coming through on the chat window, and there's a few of my favourites of fail fast to succeed sooner sort of quotes, and a lot of those it's not about failure, it's about learning. And I think that's part of being a transformational leader. Is it's a lesson, and we learn from it and we do something differently the next time. And I think we've discussed how important empathy is during the process, and there's experiences of both where it's worked. But one of the other questions it was looking at, and I think Mel's also touched on this as well, but what are the differences when you're leading change internally versus leading change externally? What's the same? What's different? And Mel's question on there in line with that is, how much harder is whole organisational changes versus changing areas or groups within an organisation, if that's the case? Caryn, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, look, I suppose I've looked at both sides of the coin in that obviously I lead the change internally at Gilbert and Tobin at a holistic level, but we also do it in individual practice groups. But I've been fortunate through G&T Innovate working with a lot of clients who are a legal function in a broader, corporate organisation, and they are looking to change. I think I would say to that it is easier when you have more control over what you are trying to change. So if you're doing it at a small level, let's say, for example, if you're going and you're changing one particular process, like GT Docs, for example, yes, I had to get the whole firm to buy into it, but the main people I had to get to buy into it was more our competition and regulatory partners, as well as our litigation partners. Like, they were the key sort of people that we needed buy-in. And then I suppose, again, I'm quite fortunate over here is that we did have the mandate and we could go ahead with that. But I'm conscious that certainly in my experience of leading or helping with some change in-house functions in broader corporate environments is obviously there are budgets for that, and you need to work within the business lines as well. So you can't just change your particular ways of working. You need to see how that broadly impacts the broader corporate environment. So I think, obviously the smaller the change and the smaller the key stakeholders involved, the easier that change is. And the larger the organisation, the larger the impact of that particular process on various stakeholders within that organisation, the larger the change. And I think the main reason for that is you're just dealing with a far greater number of stakeholders.
Yeah, and when you're looking at those stakeholders, I wonder, in terms of delivering the transformation, is celebrating the success and even maybe celebrating the failures, how important is that? And have any of you done that in the past, and how have you done it, and what was the outcome of the celebrations? I know, Caryn, if you've done any, but any of the other panelists would like to answer that one as well.
I suppose being a B2C organisation where we help clients with small matters, each client that comes doesn't appreciate how much more awesome their experience was compared to 6 months ago. So we're deprived of that, which doesn't seem fair sometimes. We do an NPS survey at the end of each client's matter, and that is a deeply annoying part of it, that we don't get that direct feedback there. We celebrate numbers within the firm that aren't just, look how many files we've closed. We celebrate things like those NPS scores. We've gone from it being 95% to 97%. Is that because of that change we made to our state revenue office form, or are our clients just happier because they're no longer homeschooling? Which of those two things was it? And we share that as a team. We also sort of do shout outs as well for someone that's gone above and beyond to help as part of it. But it's hard to find the right measurables because you don't always have a control person that was equally involved in each part of that change.
Sure. Well, I'm conscious I've only got about 4 or 5 minutes left, so I wanted to do some summing up, and I wanted to ask, in terms of, do you think being a transformational leader is something you're born with, or do you think you can learn it? And if you can learn it, what do you reckon are the top 3 traits or characteristics a transformational leader has to have? So, Kate, what are your top 3?
So my top 3 are authenticity, openness, and tenacity. And I don't think it's something that you're born with. I think that you absolutely can learn it. I've certainly been on a huge learning journey myself in my time at Justice Connect. I think it's very much about mindsets. It's very much about attitude. The point I make around authenticity is I think people have got pretty good bullshit radars. So I would really encourage people to just be themselves in their leadership. If you sort of try to follow a playbook or some manual on change management, I think people can start to feel resistant to that. So I think you just need to be your best form of your leadership self, as opposed to trying to adopt some character of what you think a good leader looks like, would be my advice, because I think if you're authentic, people will just respond a lot better to that. And the openness point is about that curiosity, challenging your view, your worldview, making sure that you're always receptive to new thinking, even if it is quite challenging. And the tenacity is just, sticking with it.
Yeah. And Laura, what are your top 3 traits?
Mine are grit, accountability, and humility. Grit, just because you're getting knocked down and you're getting up again, and you're getting knocked down and you're getting up again. And sometimes I just feel it's a numbers game, that who can just get up and stay up longer than the others, and recover faster from knockbacks. Accountability, because if you have to own any changes that you make, and sometimes they won't work, and you can't blame anyone else for that but yourself. And humility, because you won't get it right each time, and you need to accept that quickly.
And Caryn, your top 3?
So Laura and I have one in common, in that it's grit, for the obvious reasons that you would want grit if you are in a change role. I've also got inspiring, because I think it's really important for your team to believe, particularly if you've got a large team, to believe in what you're actually trying to achieve, and that vision and purpose. And then also encouraging, because there are going to be times where it's great, and there are going to be times that it's really challenging, and that constant psychological safety within teams and encouragement is absolutely critical. And to your point, Alison, around whether you're born with it, I think similarly to Kate, you probably grow into a transformational leader in saying that, though I think EQ is incredibly important. And I think that's probably something partly that you're born with.
And really quickly, we've got a minute left, and I will sum up after this, but in 25 words or less, if you've got one piece of advice that you'd give fellow leaders to help them on their own transformation journey, what would that be? Start with Laura.
Remember why you're doing it, stick it on a post-it note, don't forget it, and keep going back to it.
Excellent. Kate?
Keep pushing, but listen carefully and be open to changing direction.
Fabulous. Caryn?
I'd say give things a try. You might surprise yourself.
Excellent. So finishing up now, I wanted to thank all of our expert panel very much today for their wise words of wisdom in terms of what makes a transformational leader. I think it's all about moving people to fulfill a vision. What do they do differently? By the sounds of what you've heard today, they inspire, they influence, they have a whole lot of grit, and they are able to provide the why and tailor the what's in it for me to the project audience and the key stakeholders. And the characteristics that they've mentioned, they're encouraging, inspirational, accountability, humility, they're authentic, they're open, tenacious. I would also add, generally, they're going to be eternal optimists, able to do clear communication and obviously have that open and inclusive approach throughout. So we really hope you enjoyed this session. The session will now also be available as part of the on-demand program for this event and as a video, and in most cases actually a podcast as well on the CLI and ALTMA websites after the event. If you'd like to receive updates about these and the work of the CLI and ALTMA, please be sure to follow them on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. And thanks everyone for joining us today.